who's, everyone knows whom if they're Indian, or who's up on civil rights movements. And also with him is Mr. Lehman Brightman, who's also a lecturer on spiritual belief at Contra Costa College. He used to be at Berkeley. And also, we didn't know she was going to come, but we were proud to have her. She's a senator from North Dakota, Mrs. Pam Holland. They just came on the flight. We're sorry we couldn't have their speaking arrangement today in S-121 because they had an important conference to attend to. So I guess we're pressed for time. So Dennis?
Sure about the announcement later on.
Yeah. Okay, Dennis. Or Mr. Lehman, he'll come first. We're very honored to have him.
Thank you. It's nice to see this many people turn out for 2 Indians and a white senator from North Dakota. Usually we don't draw this much attention. I know you're here because of Dennis Banks, and possibly we could give you a little information on why Dennis Banks is here and how he came to this state and the injustices that brought him here. There are a lot of people in this state that have been supporting him. We've got over 500,000 signatures on petitions. Over 500,000 signatures on petitions. They've received over 100,000 letters, telegrams, and etc. who've come into the governor's office. And still this man hasn't moved. We're staging a mass march on the 3rd of April, which will be Saturday. We hope to have between 10 and 20,000 people there. They're coming from all different parts of the state. We've got caravans that are coming from almost every college in this state. We've got caravans of cars coming from the different Indian centers. And we hope to have, as I said, between 10 and 20,000 people. Now, this will start in San Francisco, California, if some of you are interested in coming. We will have arrangements for accommodations, for housing, very limited food and so forth, but if you're interested in coming, we'd like to have you. It'll be the largest march ever held in this state for an Indian individual, and it'll be one of the most interesting marches because it's the first time this many people have assembled for an American Indian in this country to bring about some type of justice. I'd like to briefly give you a little history upon Dennis Banks' case and why he's here. Can you hear me back there? I don't know, I'm talking, this mic is a little offset there. Beautiful. Dennis Banks is he's a co-founder of the American Indian movement. He's one of the national Indian leaders in this country. He has been for about 10 years. And to Indian people, he's looked upon with a tremendous amount of respect. He's a man of integrity. He doesn't drink. He doesn't use dope. He doesn't lie or steal. And he's one of the few men that I know that I respect and look upon in this light. And he's one of the few people that young Indians look upon in this light, that they can look upon with respect and know that there's a man who's leading them and who they can look upon in such a light that they've never looked upon somebody like this before. Many of our people have turned to drink because of the damn injustices, because of the federal government's pressure and the pressure from society. But it's very rare you find an individual that you can respect, and he is one of them. And when I get through here giving you a little brief history of why he's wanted by the authorities in South Dakota, I think maybe you'll have a different opinion and a different light. You'll be brought into a different light on this man. This starts off in Buffalo Gap, South Dakota. A white man walked into a bar, a man by the name of Daryl Schmidt. He hadn't been in the bar but about 5 minutes, and he announced, he says, "I'm going to kill an Indian tonight." And within 5 more minutes, he had stabbed a young Indian by the name of Wesley Badheart Bull to death. He stabbed him in the heart. Now, there were 6 eyewitnesses present. And of these 6 eyewitnesses, 4 were white men and 2 were Indian. After stabbing him, the police came. They didn't arrest Daryl Schmidt. When they finally did arrest Daryl Schmidt, it was 3 days later. And they charged him with second-degree manslaughter. Now, this was one of around 260 Indians who've been killed in South Dakota within the last 2 to 3 years. No white man who's killed an Indian has ever gone to jail for it in that state. After killing this man, he was charged with second-degree manslaughter, as I said. The sheriff stated there wasn't enough evidence to support a murder charge, even though there were 4 white men and 2 Indians present. Now, when they tried Darrell Schmidt, he was let off scot-free. And now he's a martyr in that part of South Dakota because he killed an Indian and got away with it. He's looked upon with a tremendous amount of respect by the local white people. Now, later, Darrell Schmidt, after he was looked upon with such light and with respect and what have you, the mother of the murdered boy, Sarah Badhart Bull, she contacted the American Indian movement and asked them if they could help bring about some type of justice in this case. She got a hold of Dennis Banks and Russell Means and some other members, and they came down to support her. And when she went down and they scheduled a meeting with the local law enforcement officers and other dignitaries within the state to protest the light sentence of this man. The meeting was called in Custer, South Dakota. After they called the meeting, when Dennis Banks, Russell Means, and Sarah Badhart Bull and some other Indian people came down, the white people refused to meet with them, even though the meeting had been scheduled. They finally allowed Dennis Banks and Russell Means and some other Indian people into the meeting, and Sarah Badhart Bull wasn't allowed in at this time. She wasn't there. Now, while the meeting was going on with Dennis and some other people, Sarah tried to get into the meeting. And we have pictures of one of the local cops. When she tried to force her way into the meeting, he grabbed her around the neck, choked her, and threw her down some steps. At this point, the Indians in the audience came to her aid, and a riot ensued. For her part in this riot, Sarah Badhart Bull was given 1 to 5 years in prison. She served 6 months in prison, and she's now out on appeal. All she did was trying to bring about some type of justice to the murder of her son. Now, while the riot was going on, they threw tear gas into the meeting place where Dennis Banks and Russell Means and some other people were. He picked up a policeman's billy club and knocked a window out, and they jumped out through the window. He was charged with burglary for knocking the window out and escaping through the window. He was charged with rioting, being armed in a riot without intent to kill. That's a major offense in South Dakota. You can kill an Indian and walk away scot-free, but if you pick up a goddamn policeman's billy club and knock out a window, you can go to jail for 15 years. He was charged with being armed in a riot, burglary, arson, and a series of other counts, charged up to 11 different counts. Well, they tried him in Custer, South Dakota. And this is an interesting point. The state attorney general came down to personally try Dennis Banks. Now, this is an interesting man. His name is William Jinklo. He's wanted for rape on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation. This man, one night when he was taking his babysitter home, when he was a lawyer working for the Rosebud Sioux tribe, he pulled off into a cornfield, and at gunpoint he raped a 15-year-old Rosebud Sioux girl and told her that if she told anybody, he would kill her. Now, later this man was charged with rape, and there's a warrant for his arrest on the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota. This rapist personally came down after he was elected Attorney General and tried Dennis Banks. He intimidated not only umpteen Indians, but non-Indians alike, and not to come down and testify in Banks' behalf. Now, in trying the case, he put a gag rule on Dennis Banks where he couldn't talk to the press. But he, in turn, was spreading lies, innuendos, and other accusations against Dennis. Then, at the same time, he told Dennis Banks' lawyer, who was a court-appointed lawyer, that he was not to defend Dennis with too much vigor, or he would personally get him and blackball him throughout the state. After Dennis saw the man wasn't defending him with any great amount of vigor, he asked the man what was wrong, and he wouldn't say. Later, they found out through 2 other people who questioned the man that he admitted that the state attorney general had personally threatened him. Now, Dennis and his lawyers were not allowed the right to use a local law library. The state attorney general personally arrested one Indian woman who was testifying in Dennis's behalf. He arrested her off the witness stand. He intimidated other Indians who came down. Now, the interesting part is the jury selection. In the jury selection of an Indian by the name of Vernon Belcourt a few months earlier in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they went through 200 people in trying to pick a jury of 12 people who would not say they hated Indians. And after they couldn't find a jury of 12 people out of 200 people, the judge dismissed the case. Well, when they started trying to select a jury for Dennis Banks, when they reached the 200 point, Banks asked them to dismiss the trial, and the judge refused. When they got up to 225, he again asked, and the judge refused. When they got to 275, he refused, 300, and when they finally got to 325 and 350. 350 people they got before they could find a jury of 12 people. 50 people came up in one whack, and when they asked them how they felt about Dennis Banks, they all raised their hand and said guilty. They have no rednecks there. They're red all over, those people. They don't make any pretense about how they feel about Indians. They dislike them. I was born in South Dakota on a Cheyenne River Sioux reservation, and I lived there till I was 13 years old. I've gone back periodically, and this is one of the more, it's the Alabama of the North. They make no pretense about how they feel, and this microphone system is not making any goddamn pretense either. It's not too hot. And, I don't know whether this is goddamn planned or what, but it's very goddamn distracting.
Just give it a little more service.
Dennis Banks was tried, convicted, and he stood a chance of getting 15 years in jail. Now, when they selected the final jury, Daryl Schmidt, the murderer, and his wife were picked to be the two of the jurists. He finally got Daryl Schmidt removed and his wife removed, but two of Daryl Schmidt's cousins did serve on a jury that convicted Dennis Banks. So in essence, what I'm saying is, for an Indian to participate in a riot in South Dakota where Dennis Banks stood a chance of getting 15 years, Sarah Badhart Bull got 5 years. And yet a white man who kills an Indian can walk off scot-free, and he's a local hero. Now, this is a type of Western mentality that exists in South Dakota and North Dakota and Montana and some other states I can name where you have large Indian populations. In trying to combat this, we're asking people to sign petitions stopping the extradition of Dennis Banks to South Dakota. We're asking people to donate funds and help with a legal battle. And by coming down here, I'm sure, I don't know what Dennis is going to talk to you about exactly. My general rule is to give you some basic information about why he's here. He escaped rather than go to jail for 15 years. Now, the local warden has personally stated in South Dakota that he doesn't want Dennis Banks in his jail because he doesn't want to be responsible for his death. Two prison officials have publicly stated that he won't live 20 minutes if he's placed in that jail. Now, the state attorney general who's wanted for rape, he personally stated that the only way to stop the American Indian movement leaders such as Dennis Banks is put a bullet in their head and blow their brains out. Now, this man is a rapist. He was also stopped at another time while he was on another Indian reservation. The police stopped him late at night, and he tried to escape from the police, and when they finally ran him down, this is Indian police now, and they forced him to get out of the car, he was stark nude from the waist down. No pants, shorts, socks, shoes, nothing. He stood there in all his white, hairy ugliness in front of God and the Indian people. This man is an exhibitionist, he's a sex fiend, a rapist, and evidently he molests young girls and boys at the same time. Now, he made the statement 2 weeks ago he was coming to California. And if he does come out here, I suggest that you take all your young boys and girls and possibly get them out of the way if this man comes to Southern California, because he's definitely wanted for rape. You know, I'm going to quit now, but before I quit, there's a joke that pertains to Indian people and white people, and I think it will give you a little better understanding of some of the things that we're going through and why white people seem to have a hard time in understanding American Indians. We were talking coming down here, and I was talking with Pamela Holland, the young lady here who's a state senator from North Dakota, and she was explaining some of the things that she went through as a senator and the discrimination she's faced from her colleagues in office, other senators and congressmen who dislike Indians, and she's, I'm sure that we've talked this over, she's almost positive that she's not going to be re-elected in North Dakota for her stand in behalf of Dennis Banks. And I think you really have to admire a woman who'll come out and stand for her convictions, knowing full well that this might lead to personal harm against her in South Dakota, that she probably won't be re-elected. And the fact is that somebody like this is as courageous as Dennis Banks. And I think that I think we should all be especially happy and thankful a woman like this could come down here. And I think you ought to give her a hell of a hand. That takes a lot of guts, and she's got plenty of them to come down and make a major stand. She's the only woman and only white woman in this country who's got up and stood up in the force of all of this discrimination and racism in behalf of an Indian. And she should be a goddamn president of this country. I'm sure she'd be a hell of a lot better than that buffoon we've got in there. And, Before I go, I'd like to tell you this joke about Indian people and whites. It's about culture. Maybe it'll help you understand Indians more. There were 3 young Indians on an Indian reservation, and they were trying to figure out what you do at Christmas time. And they didn't know too much about white culture. And so their ages were 5, 6, and 7. And they were discussing this, and nobody really knew. And so in this discussion, the 5-year-old said, well, I think at Christmas time, he said, I've got the answer. He said, that's where they take eggs, and they color them, and they hide them from us. And we go out and hunt for them, and the one who finds the most is the winner. And the 6-year-old says, no, he said, that's not right. He said, I lived in a white town for a week one time, and I know all about these white people, know quite a bit about their culture and their historical events. And he said, Christmas is this way. He said, they take masks and they put them on, and they go around and they knock on doors and holler trick or treat. And he said, if they give you something, well, you shake their hand. If they don't, you rock their windows and so forth. And he said, that's what you do at Christmas. And the 3rd one, who was a little older, he was 7, he said, no, he said, you really don't, neither one of you know what you're talking about. He said, I went to a white school for a month once. Lived in a white city for a couple months, and he says, I know quite a bit about white people. And he says, this is the way Christmas is. He said, they take a white man out and they nail him to a cross, and they put him on a high hill for 3 days and nights. And at the end of the 3rd day and night, they take him down, and if he's still alive, they put him in this cave, and they roll a huge boulder in front. And they leave this boulder there in front, and they keep him there for 4 days and nights. And at the end of the 4th day and night, they remove this boulder, and if this white man is still alive, and he comes out and he sees his shadow, there's 6 more weeks of winter. And, I'm glad you caught that, because Indian humor is sometimes a little different from white humor. And I'm going to get off here. I've served my purpose, and thank you for listening, and we're going to bring on next is Pamela Holland, and this is that courageous young lady that we were talking about. Pamela.
You know, some people, like Mr. Brightman, thinks I have lots of guts and takes lots of courage. But when it gets to the point where you're so frustrated if you don't do anything, to me, I was kind of selfish writing a letter to the governor and coming here. Or I don't think I could have lived with myself anymore. So to me, it doesn't take courage or guts. It's time for people to become aware. Dennis Banks himself personally deserves fairness in his sentencing, in trials. Up in the Dakotas, people think it's all a joke. There was recently just an editorial saying that Dennis Banks is putting down his own state, talking about the justice system, and that the Dakotas didn't deserve it. I wrote the letter not knowing that I would end up here, but when asked to come, I had a decision to make, and you don't just mouth off like I've heard all my life, and no action. You mouth off. If you mean it, you act. So I had no other decision to make. I came to say that Dennis Banks is telling the truth. He's not exaggerating. He's not exaggerating when he says his life is in danger in the Dakotas. I was just in the governor's office yesterday with surveys done in the Dakotas measuring the level of prejudice, which shows a high level of prejudice in the Dakotas. They did want me to know in the governor's office that if there was a hearing, and I said, what do you mean if there is a hearing? We don't have to have a hearing, he said. If this state does not have a hearing for Dennis Banks, it's the biggest cop-out I've ever seen. There may be a hearing to pacify all of those who are for Dennis Banks, but it is time, especially this year. I can hardly even look at red, white, and blue this year for some reason. I don't think it's time to celebrate. When I think of the bicentennial and 200 years, I don't see 200 years. In North Dakota, the Mandan Indian, 8,000 BC. The Indian, the longest living race in the world. And I don't know how anyone can ignore it anymore. It's time for all to speak up. I hope all of you will do whatever you can in your own way. I wrote a letter that was my way. And little did I know that perhaps I could help more. But whatever else anyone can do, whatever else I can do, it's got to be done. It's got to be done this year. It's got to start. This whole country's got to start facing what's going to happen. If the Indian people had only had shared half of the decision-making in our country from the day one my ancestors came over, our country would not be in the shape it is in today, I know. They lived. They lived. Indian people have a tremendous value system. It's like identical to the one that I grew up with, except mine was just mouthed and no action. But the Indian people, Dennis Banks will represent whatever the governor here does, whatever the governor in Oregon does. It's going to make it'll be a major influence on Indian people from this day on. And I have a feeling that there are going to be many more Indian people before the courts this year and from now on. I always say they have a tremendous value of patience. Well, they've been patient too long, much too long. Perhaps they still can be patient, but they've always fought for what is right, and that's what they're doing now, except now when they speak up, they're considered radical. I'm glad that I could be here. I know you're waiting for Mr. Banks. There's just one little thing. People don't really understand all over, even in the Dakotas. This was Sunday before last paper in a major city in the Dakotas. On it is an ad by a barber shop. Afraid of being scalped, it says. And the most shameful part of it all is an Indian shown there with scissors in his hands. And it's the famous, bravest Chief Red Cloud. This is representative of where the non-Indian's brain's at. And it's true. It's true what Dennis Banks says. And Dennis, are you ready? I wish you'd put that red, white, and blue pen down. Thanks. Dennis Banks.
Red, white, and blue dress you were wearing this morning. Don't let her fool you. I want to recognize, first of all, in the state of California that we have, as Lee mentioned, we have over 500,000 signatures from citizens in California, and they have, we more likely will surpass the 600,000 signatures sometimes today, and we'll be collecting more signatures tomorrow at the, there's a benefit in San Francisco by Tony Bennett, who came out in support of our struggle here for our sanctuary in California. And just this morning we received news that another personality, well-known personality, Sarah Vaughan, will be there tomorrow evening also. And in the state government, those of you should remember that the Chicano caucus leader, Richard Altori, has also made a commitment and signed a letter, and along with the Majority Leader David Roberti, urging Governor Brown to deny extradition, and along with the Lieutenant Governor of California, Mervyn Dimely. So these people have already looked at the case of Custer, South Dakota, and while the petitions asked that my life be spared, the names on the petitions go far beyond saving one man's life. The names on the petitions go far beyond asking sanctuary for one person. These persons signed these petitions knowing that it's time that we began to offer sanctuary in a whole lot of fields. Sanctuary from slum conditions, sanctuary from the poverty, and not only in the Indian community, but sanctuary from the poverty in the Chicano and the black, poor white, Asian communities, to end the discriminatory policies that have existed over us for so many years. In the state where Pamela's from, Senator Holland, she was just telling us on the way over that it's still a law. It's still a law in the Dakotas to shoot an Indian. It's all right. It's legal to shoot an Indian from a covered wagon. And this year, certainly there's going to be a lot of covered wagons up there. And we have to, those of you who will be planning your vacations this year, kind of go around at North Dakota or South Dakota and boycott the entire Dakota area, because they might mistake you for Indian from long range, and you'll never get back. Lee mentioned that tomorrow Saturday we're having our final march. It's not our final march. It's a march to hopefully gain the 1 million signatures that we sought out after on February 27th. And the march will begin at 11 o'clock on 25th and Harrison for those of you who are going to be up there. There are many people from many different states that are coming over here to support the fight for extradition. Next week, or on the 13th, I will be removed by federal order to the state of Oregon. But the fight for extradition will continue here in California. And I'll carry that fight to Oregon. I hate to sound like a man running for president, but if I win here in California, I'll win in Oregon. They asked me many times why I picked California, and I certainly couldn't pick Alabama or Mississippi, but I believe it's time that I began to carry that fight not only to California and Oregon, but asking sanctuary for Indian people in all these states. It's time that, as Senator Holland indicated, it's a time when some people reflect on this country as only 200 years, and yet for the Native Americans it's been many thousands of years that Indian people have been here. And this fight is going to have to be carried to Mississippi and to Alabama. And if I have to go to each and every state and carry this fight for extradition, I'm going to have to do that, because the fight for Dennis Banks to save him from being extradited back to South Dakota, with your name on the signatures, I know that you'd be signing it on behalf of your interest towards all Indian people in this country. not only in the States, but Indian Native Americans in Canada, and the brutal massacres that are going on this very second in South America and Central America, and for the many Chicanos who are, and Mexican Americans in Mexico and Central America who are dying and being killed because of the terrible repression there. You're going to be signing your name to a signature that's asking more for a stop to extradition back to South Dakota. The whole irony of this case is that I live in South Dakota, and that's my home. And both my wife and I, would like to go back there someday, but not under the conditions that exist now. But I'll go back someday to South Dakota. It's my home because that's where our children have been born, except for my last child. I'm the father, proud father of 15 children, and before I lay down to quit, I'll probably see 100 children there, and I want to start to dispel a very ugly rumor that George Washington was the father of this country. I'm the father of this country, at least my own area. By the time I'll have enough signatures. But Governor Brown may look at one signature and decide that it's time to deny extradition. He hasn't made that decision yet to deny or to send me back. He has 90 days from February 15th. Now, April 5th, I have a federal removal hearing, and at that time, it'll be a very serious time when he might or may not grant extradition back to South Dakota. We have some petitions here out in the back here, and Governor Brown might just see your name and decide that it's time to deny extradition. And when I first came here to California, I didn't realize, of course, the system of justice that exists in many parts of this country. And I hope that California can be that first state, the first state to stand up and say that we will stand with our Indian people. Thank you. Are they in from outside? I mean, where's Lee still outside talking?
There's some lady up there.
I wanted to, it's very difficult to speak on outside because it's hard to hold the audience. And it was suggested that we return here and hopefully give you an in-depth account of what is going on, not only with the trial itself and where we stand with the appeals, but also to introduce to you a woman, the Senator Holland from North Dakota. She made a statement about a week ago. She wrote to Governor Brown, and she's also stated that Indians rarely receive a fair trial in North Dakota, in South Dakota or North Dakota. But with our case right now, I have a hearing, a federal removal hearing, which will remove me to Oregon on April 13th. The extradition fight here in California will remain alive. What I'm doing is I'm expanding it now to include Oregon. And so a lot of work, a lot of petitions are going to have, the same kinds of petitions are going to also have to be sent to Governor Robert Straub of Oregon. So
those of you who want to, you can take these signatures or these petitions, and when we get removed to Oregon, you can just begin a whole new petition drive again. I think we're going to win here in California. It's very hard for Governor Brown to not look at 500,000 signatures of residents of California. And they've come from almost every community. They have come from every community, even in Orange County. And, you know, in San Diego, we were in San Diego last week, which is Orange County and San Diego were probably the roughest. We collected signatures, about 1,200 signatures in San Diego, and we have 400 signatures from here. There are people that are coming in tonight from Oklahoma and also from Minnesota, and Portland will be in tonight. Caravans coming in for the march. If there's, if we have a strong showing at the march tomorrow, or rather Saturday, it would really help. And those of you who want to come from Orange County, if you have these big placards, and identifying yourself as Orange County, it would look good. The main thing that we have to remember, and I'm not talking to people who don't understand the problem. The main thing that we have to understand is that the fight for extradition, it should not be centered solely around the issue of having Dennis Banks stopped from being removed back to South Dakota. The main thing in all of our talks is that that struggle represents only one struggle. There are many struggles across this country, and we've always mentioned that the sanctuary, if it is offered to me, is a step towards offering sanctuary to all Indian people from the killings and murders that is going on not only in South Dakota, but we're centering on South Dakota. And the truth, of course, is that there are killings going on in every state, in California, and in Oregon, and New Mexico, and the terrible, brutal slayings in New Mexico of just a year ago. When they found 13 Navajo people butchered, chopped up. I think that's, those kinds of messages are going to have to be included. And those of you who speak about the whole issue, I want you to remember that Dennis Banks is just a symbol of what is going on all across this country. And I want you to remember that and talk about that, and not talk about it only in terms of saving Indian people. I want you to talk about it in terms of saving poor whites and saving, the Asians. Asians and Indian people in California were hung. We're not even allowed a decent status of human beings, during the 1800s. We have to talk about of over 5,000 Chicanos who were strung up, who were hung without a trial, simply because they were Spanish-speaking people. And we have to talk about the Native American struggle in South America and North America. And it's a good opportunity. At least we have one opportunity during this year, because there's worldwide attention on the mistreatment and the misconduct of this government right now against its own citizens. And we have people that are springing up and beginning to talk about and identifying with the people who are hurt. And it came as a complete shock to me that a white senator from North Dakota would stand up and make that decision. And a woman a woman at that, you know. Where in the hell is all the men senators that are so goddamn brave, and you know, they're the ones that are doing all the killing and butchering anyway. You know, where in the hell are they? That's what we have to begin to talk about when you go out, when people ask you what's behind the issue of the extradition fight for Banks of South Dakota. When my 15th child was born in prison in Wichita, Kansas, and my wife is now facing federal firearm charges in Kansas and also in Oregon, where both her and I will go on trial on May 12th. And the medicine woman named our baby Iron Door Woman, and after she had visited the jail, and she made a statement which you know, goes to the whole heart of the issue, and that, you know, let her grow up, let Iron Door grow up and tell the truth of how she received her name, and how many of us, not only Indian people, how many of us are born behind iron doors, and the doors of better homes on the reservation, better housing in the poverty areas of San Francisco or California or in Chicago. The iron doors that prevent us from reaching adulthood, you know, because many of our students are committing suicide. The iron doors that keep us from having a decent standard of living in this country. And when I say we, I mean, you know, poor people in general. And that's what's behind the whole extradition fight. And that's why Custer went down. You know, and it's because when Custer first came to South Dakota in 1776, he met people who stood up to what Custer was standing up for, and they defeated him. Well, Custer in 1973 also went down because of the same reason. People were standing up, and it was the mother Wesley Badhart Bull, who stood up and began to take on a state trooper, and the trooper was 6'4", and yet Sarah, who stands only 5'3", you know, she took him on. You know, and they got into well, you know how Indian women fight. I don't know if you know that, but some of you men know now how they fight. They can get it on. And I'm kind of afraid of them sometimes. And but here was, you know, for the reason that Wesley Badhart Bull was stabbed to death, and a goddamn charge of second-degree manslaughter. And that's one woman standing up to it, that she called us in. And the woman in Montana, Maria Sanchez, you know, stood up to Westmoreland Industries because they were coming to strip mine the land on July 4th of 1974. And she came out on the morning or no, it was July 1st, on the new fiscal year, when those of you who know the Interior Solicitor, who is now Under Secretary of Interior, his name is Kent Frizzell. And, excuse me, are we having problems at
Question I've been trying, someone else raised this. Since the Indians are wards of the federal government, do the state governments have any power? I mean, would the federal marshal arrest his man, couldn't they extradite him to South Dakota?
I'm not a lawyer. A lot of people think senators are lawyers. I was trying to figure this out yesterday when I was in the governor's office talking to his chief legal man. He said something about state charges. The governor can do something about, or can do something about the federal charges, which are the ones in Oregon, the federal charges. they could take him. I really don't have it real clear. It's just it's kind of muddled. It's a little surprising yesterday. I thought there would be a hearing. That was my impression. It just hadn't been decided when yet. But he doesn't even have to have a hearing, I think.
He doesn't need to have a hearing here.
He doesn't. I mean, the governor doesn't have to even give a hearing. He can just. It can just, pocket veto. That's what I understand.
Isn't it going to be an uphill fight in Oregon, considering how the Indians are treated in Oregon?
Well, I don't know. I think what Governor Brown says here, that this is a different case. He's already been convicted, but he didn't show up for sentencing. That's different. Of course, he still could stand up for that too. But in Oregon, I suppose it would be tougher. Because if we're talking about trial, not just sentencing.
But even as far as extradition goes, there's not that many people that are really that active in Indian affairs in Oregon. I mean, they don't care. It's really going to be hard to convince people in Oregon like you can in California. Maybe I'm biased, but I really...
History kind of shows that.
On the matter of the trial, have you read the transcripts of it? I was curious if I was hearing that it was so obviously biased, which I believe it probably was. Could anybody pick it up, read it, and see that bias in it? Because I'm asked, where did you get your information from? Well, it's from one of the Indian newspapers. Oh, well, you know about that. Yeah. Who could be more biased than an Indian newspaper for an Indian?
You mean if you got a copy of the
Right.
transcript? Well, everybody interprets what they read, You probably could if you had the patience to sit down and read the transcript. No point in the time. You'd have to pay for it. I don't know how much that gets to be yet.
How is the news media in relation to the problem?
Well, it's very quiet. I am from North Dakota. I don't get South Dakota papers, except I know what I've issued from North Dakota has gotten into the newspapers. Because there's been a lot that's happened in South Dakota. The only thing that's really happened in North Dakota is last summer when Russell Means was shot, came over the border into North Dakota. Then things really, everybody says, oh, we're not prejudiced. We've grown up around Indians. We know what they're all about. We're not prejudiced. But then when actually they were confronted with someone there, people that I've never seen act like that, people I've worked with, state's attorneys, etc., were talking about he was shot from the back here, one out here. Said they wished they had aimed a little higher. All kinds of, little remarks. Jokes,
But I mean, is the reporting slanted, pro or con, or fair reporting?
I've seen copies of newspapers in South Dakota. It's con. That's why people are so, I was trying to find one of the Indian leaders, for example, one time. I went through the operator and I was trying a city. It was Sioux Falls or Rapid City. So we could call 3 major hotels. And mind you, these are professional people in business. The operator said, we're calling for so-and-so. She said, she could have said, well, he's not registered. She says, oh my God, I hope he's not here, And the operator obviously didn't know who this man was that I was trying to reach. And so the operator was really astonished. And so we tried the second hotel. And said, who? And she hung up when she heard the name again. And these are business people. And you could really do your own sampling, a little survey by just calling up any place and just mentioning the names. These surveys had shown that there is a high level of prejudice against Indians, but especially the AIM leaders. See, because they know these names. In fact, they call him Dennis Means. A lot of people have asked, me about Dennis Means. Yeah.
I'd just like to say that I really don't think you can blame the people for reacting the way they do. I'm from South Dakota. I've lived there up until 2 years ago. I was at the University of South Dakota when, the Wounded Knee thing was going on. And the newspaper reporting is very biased. It's, the people are just common people, probably, half of them maybe, they don't have college education, and you believe what you read. And after hearing about the Wounded Knee massacre, or what happened down there, it was very frightful. Mm-hmm. And the Sioux Falls incident when they, destroyed the courthouse practically. Those things are scary. And to hear that maybe people, the AIM leaders, are in your hotel.
I've brought all these surveys that we've been talking about. In 1973, after the Wounded Knee siege had ended, we had filed what they call a change of venue with the district court in South Dakota. And we contended that the community in South Dakota was so biased that we could not receive a fair trial. And so the court ordered a survey of 1,200 prospective jurors in South Dakota. And of the 1,200 that was interviewed, 80% of them felt that both Russell Means and myself were guilty of all the crimes in South Dakota. And because of that opinion, the judge took the trial granted the change of venue and moved the trial to Minnesota. And from there, we went to trial, both Russell and myself. The trial lasted 8.5 months. And after 8.5 months, the judge dismissed the case because of governmental misconduct. This was the unauthorized use of military equipment against civilian citizens without presidential proclamation. That was one reason. The other reason was because of the perjured testimony given by federal agents. That was two. And two, because of the misconduct of the prosecution. And that happened all during the 8.5 months. And then, of course, the testimony, their midnight witness was an Indian person who testified. Or during the trial itself, the witnesses could not connect Russell Means or myself to any of the crimes that we were alleged to have committed. And finally, at the end, they brought in an Indian person by the name of Moves Camp. And he went on a witness stand, and he stayed on the stand for a day and a half. And he connected Russell and myself to every crime that happened at Wounded Knee. And he said he saw us there at the beginning, and then he stayed with Russell. He was with Russell all during the month of April, and he saw Russell commit many crimes. He said that on April 29th, Russell was personally directing an attack against one of the armored personnel carriers, which went to the assault charges that Russell and I entered into a conspiracy to assault federal officers. But we knew this man was not in Wounded Knee on February 29th. As a matter of fact, he wasn't in there in April at all. And finally we began to check out his complete testimony. And he was here in California. and he was raising monies for the Wounded Knee Legal Defense team, and all during the month of April. But yet the government set him up there so that he could connect us to all the crimes. And that was their surprise witness. And finally, when we got videotapes of this man speaking April 16th at UC Berkeley, well, then the judge was convinced that there was such a massive amount of misconduct that he would have to dismiss the trials. That is gone, but there are still 8 people that have to go to trial on the Wounded Knee incident. The second opinion what came from Minnehaha County in the eastern part of South Dakota, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the opinion there was that after the judge had voir dire, after he had questioned 107 witnesses, prospective jurors, that they could not see anybody. And so he again ruled that the community bias was such of a nature that AIM leaders or members of the American Indian movement could not receive a fair trial in South Dakota. And so there have been 2 opinions by the judiciary in South Dakota which have substantiated our claims that it was impossible for us to receive a trial in South Dakota. There's been a statement by the Attorney General, William Janklow, who stipulated that there was a lot of pressure from Custer residents to move the trial out, but I said, no, I'm going to have it in Custer. And so that's where the trial was held. And the stipulation that the Attorney General made is that he would stipulate, if we moved the trial out of Custer, that there was community bias from his own personal viewpoint, that it would be impossible for me to receive a fair trial in Custer. But I wanted to go to Custer. I wanted the trial to be held in Custer because I wanted to go right to the root of the problem that the senator speaks about, to go and to confront whites in South Dakota and go through their whole judicial system and exhaust every avenue of redress. And the trial lasted about 3 weeks, but I had an opportunity to go before 14 people and explain the story. And I was originally charged with two counts. One of them was riot, and I had an arson charge against me. The riot stemmed from the injury to a public building when Lee mentioned outside that when we were locked into that room and the tear gas began to come in there, and I grabbed a stick and I began to club out the windows, and the state's attorney and I and a newsman were all hanging out the window grasping for air. And originally, because of the news taking a picture of me smashing out the windows, they charged me with injury to a public building. And under the law in South Dakota, the law reads that forcible entry and even forcible exit is the same. You know, technically, that you have a charge of burglary, and but I have to admit that the jury just couldn't stomach that charge, and that was the first one that they threw out. And during the trial itself, the prosecution called 36 witnesses, and 35 of them could not state on the stand that they saw me commit any crimes on that day. It was the last person, a state trooper by the name of Dale Stoner, who went to the prosecution 6 months after February 6th, 6 months after the incident. And they went back to a grand jury. And he said before the grand jury that, I remember Mr. Banks struck me on that day. And yet this man did not make out a report to the police, you know, to his own supervisors. He failed to, he didn't get any kind of medical statement, but he remembered that I struck him on that day. And we couldn't find any officers that were with him, standing right next to him, that could testify that I struck Dale Stoner. And he had a little bag with him, a little brown bag. And we asked him for any kind of evidence that might prove that I struck him. So he looked into this bag and he brought out a little calendar, those calendars that you attach to your watches. And he said, "Here's my evidence." And he held it up for the jury, and on the calendar was a dent. And he said, "I was wearing this on this day." And it was that testimony that convicted me on the assault charges. Assault without intent to kill. It was assault with intent to kill, and finally they changed it around. The grand jury couldn't accept that. Finally they came back with an indictment, assault without intent to kill. And I was convicted on that charge. And those of you who have ever been involved in any kind of fist fight or any kind of brawl, if you get hit by a stick, it's going to hurt. But yet this man testified that there was no bruise, there was no markings on his wrist, you know, that he didn't complain about it that day. But 6 months after, when they went back to the grand jury to bring the charges in a catch-all motion, then I was charged with 2 counts of burglary, 2 counts of arson, 2 counts of assault, and 2 counts of riot, and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit these 4 other acts. I was charged with 11 counts, and if I was convicted on 11, the sentence was 250 years and 1 life sentence. And the whole misconduct that went through that court itself, you know, is a question. I'm also a tribal attorney on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation, and I practiced, you know, before that court on a number of occasions, and I know the law, at least on the reservation. I'm not an attorney the kind that you think about, you know, in state or federal court, but I know about some law, and I took a pledge to uphold the Constitution of the bylaws of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and additionally to that, becoming an attorney for the Rosebud tribal court system, you also pledge to uphold the laws of the United States government. And at some times I feel that there is conflict in those pledges, but I took a pledge, and I believe that when people are being hurt and when the laws are violated, then if the laws that are so repressive that they hurt people, then they should be changed or altered. But if they're so bad, then of course, you know, completely abolishment for these kinds of laws are, you know, must be called for. There have been laws throughout the United States government that have made it impossible for black